Welcome to the third of three lectures on Judaism. This will, hopefully, we have a lot to cover today, but hopefully this will get us through the key points on Judaism, and then we'll be ready to start Christianity. Left over last time, I had briefly mentioned Mark, and I didn't have the verse. It was Mark chapter 12, verse 28. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, he's talking about Jesus, he asks Jesus, which commandment is the first of all? And in verse 29, Jesus answered, the first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the Shema prayer. This is what is found in that mezuzah that I showed you. And then he goes on to say, the second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. This is the power of the Shema, the statement of monotheism. Now, by the way, I have my blue shirt on again. Blue is, I've mentioned the colors. We had saffron, orange, yellow-orange for Hinduism. We had burgundy for Buddhism. And the Israeli flag is blue and white. And so I thought for the last lecture on Judaism, I'd wear blue again. So today I want to continue a little bit with this issue of prayer, and I want to turn into something called ritual. The power of ritual. This can apply to all the religions we actually are working with, and that is that I get this teaching from David Hume. I gave you that matrix on human responses from David Hume's treatise on human nature. He also wrote a book called Treatise on Religion. And in Treatise on Religion, one of the things that he lays bare is this issue of ritual. And what he says, and I think it's really interesting, he says ritual has the power to raise an abstract concept, so an abstract concept like God, to the level of sensation, to the level of physical, feeling, sensing reality. And when you think about this, for example, you walk into a church and it's big and it's vast, and the whole idea is the vastness of God, so that you can feel that, connecting incense and repetition, the wafer and the wine, the blood and the body of Christ. These are rituals that connect what is basically an abstract concept, Jesus in your life, to reality. You can taste it, digest it. So this is the power of ritual, to take an idea. I always like to joke about weddings. I perform weddings, and so what's a wedding? It's a commitment that two people make to each other. That commitment is somewhat abstract. Can't hold it. It's a commitment. And what we do is surround it with ritual, the lighting of candles and the exchanging of rings. And I like to joke that my job as the officiant at a wedding is to make them feel married, feel like something real has happened, to connect all these physical sensations with the commitment that they're making to each other. This is the power of ritual. And so within Judaism, there are a number of rituals and other things that try and harness this power, one of which is, and we've actually talked about this when we talked about meditation, and that's the idea of a prayer shawl. So a prayer shawl. In Judaism, a prayer shawl is called a talit, This is the prayer shawl. Prayer shawl. And in Judaism, the shawl is somewhat ornate. It has some writing. This is a blessing that you say before you put it on. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvasav v'tzivanu latitatef b'tzitzit. You kiss it twice, and then you put it over your shoulders. And what's interesting about a Jewish prayer shawl is that, I joke that shawls are adult swaddles. You feel hugged, and I think that's true of a talit as well. But the real symbolism of a talit is actually these fringes. These are called the tzitzit. The fringes actually have a meaning. The way they're tied, they have these knots. The way the knots are tied, it's a mathematical system, and basically they are to symbolize the 613 commandments. So the way the knots are tied represents the number 613, and so it is the fringes of the shawl that reminds you to keep those commandments. This is one of the connections of a prayer shawl, and the ritual of putting it on and taking those abstract concepts and making them feel real. We also have something in Judaism called a yarmulke. The word, it's spelled, it actually has an R in there, but no one really pronounces the R. Yarmulke. And it's actually an E. This is the skull cap. The skull cap. I don't know if skull is, I think skull may have a K. The skull cap. Many of you have seen these. This is the prayer cap that is worn, covering your head. You will find this in many different religions. The Sikh wear turbans. The ritual of covering your head as a sign of humility before God, and it provides a physical sensation, part of this power of ritual. And right now, I'm guessing that I actually look very Jewish. These are two of the major elements, and so you would put these on perhaps before you say your own personal prayers. You might put them on in temple. We will talk about the various differences between the three denominations. So some of the issues surrounding, there's one more, and that is something called tefillin. Tefillin. These are the prayer boxes. The prayer boxes. There are two of them. They come in a little bag. They have these straps associated with them. And so what happens, and by the way, just so you know, what is in the box is just like the mezuzah. How you work with this one, there are two of them. Inside the box is the Shema prayer. That Shema, that statement of monotheism, that powerful prayer, and actually quite mystical. The idea is that you wrap tefillin. You put one box on your forehead. This is not going to work, I don't think. But it goes on your forehead at, this yarmulke has to come off, at the third eye. And then the straps go around, and they hang at the back, and then you can put your yarmulke back on. Ooh, talk about looking Jewish. This is if you remember that paragraph I read you, and the Shema, the commandment to listen to the oneness, you shall bind it as a sign upon thy hand, And that's where the other box comes in. You put it on your inner arm towards your heart, and you wrap those leather straps all the way down your arm as if you are bound to the divine. And they shall be for frontlets between thine eyes. And this is that second paragraph that follows, the Shema. And this is how it is carried out in terms of these three powerful rituals within Judaism, so that you raise this connection to the divine to literally a physical sensation. I'm going to take these back off. And the power of ritual is in which Jewish prayer is played out. And then I'd like to turn to one more element of the prayer, of the praying, and that has to do with the Sabbath cycle. The Sabbath cycle is that we have these communal prayers. I mentioned the word minyan. You get a quorum together, and then the prayers are that much stronger, a quorum of 10 men. There are regular services held in all temples on the Sabbath. And during those services, what happens is it's the cycle of Torah reading. Those first 5 books of the Jewish Bible, the 5 books of Moses, the Torah. The Torah is read throughout the year in a way that all 5 books are read over that year. So once a year, the congregation will cycle through the Torah. The Torah in ritual form is actually a scroll, not a book. It is a scroll of parchment. This is a rabbi holding up the scroll. The scroll in a temple is taken out very ritualistically. It is paraded around. People will kiss their prayer book. They'll touch the Torah and kiss their prayer book as if they have been kissing the Torah. Everyone stands when the Torah is taken out. It is it's one of the highlights of a Jewish service, and the Torah is read, and people are called up. It's an honor. Again, the Torah, there's a portion for every Sabbath. The Torah portion, such that it is apportioned such that you read the whole Torah within a Jewish year. It's the cycle of the Sabbath. One thing happens, remember, when they read that Torah, I have mentioned this, let's get it out there, and that is that the Word of God is not read aloud. Another element of Jewish prayer. The word is called the 4-letter word. The word is called the Tetragrammaton. This is the English derived from the Greek word that means the 4-letter word. That's what this means. The Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of the divine. Now, clearly it is written there. It is written in Hebrew as Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. Hebrew is written from right to left. When you go to temple, the prayer book opens from right to left. I showed you that when I showed you that Talmud. These are, in Hebrew, the letters sound like what they are called. Yud, H, V, He, Yehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh, Jehovah. There are no vowels. These are the 4 consonants associated with the Tetragrammaton. A sacred word, a word that is not read aloud. The rabbis don't want to take any chance of violating that commandment of taking the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And this is called the Tetragrammaton, and in prayer, the word Adonai is always substituted. The prayer I read putting on the prayer shawl, Baruch atah Adonai. Adonai is not the word written there. The word written there is the name of God. Adonai means the Lord. So the substitution is either Adonai, or Hashem. Hashem simply means the name. The name. Remember Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, from the last 2 lectures ago. So another element of Jewish prayer and ritual. So one more thing I want to turn to, and that's especially as it relates to ritual, and that's this issue. It's a word that most of you know. This is one of those Hebrew words that has made it into your lexicon, and the word is kosher. Kosher. So one of the rituals is something called keeping kosher. Kosher, just so you know, and it's kind of cute because people make this out into this really holy word. Kosher simply means okay. Just translates as okay. The Sabbath just translates as rest. Kosher, okay. What's okay? So kosher primarily has to do with food, has to do with what food is okay. There are a number of kosher laws. Kosher is part of those 613 commandments. Issues associated with kosher are that you, for example, you only eat meat that comes from an animal with a cleft hoof and that chews their cud. So cow is okay, and goat and sheep and deer, but not pigs. And this becomes one of those issues as Jews do not eat ham or pork. Pigs, horses, camels, rabbits, they do not fit the requirement. So there are a number of requirements. I'm not going to go into all the details of kosher laws. Know that it means okay. Sometimes it doesn't even feel like there's any rhyme or reason to them. But one of the things that is really powerful associated with kosher laws, and that has to do with the way the animal is killed. And so there is a ritual associated with the sacrifice of an animal as minimizing the pain under the auspices of of literally rabbinic regulation. And so you can be assured that kosher meat has been killed as humanely as possible. That is one of the big elements of kosher laws. You're also not supposed to mix milk and meat, so cheeseburgers are not kosher, cheese and meat. Some interesting rules that way. One of the takes is that the kosher laws are primarily for discipline, not so much for health. It is important to understand that there was no refrigeration back then, but many of these laws are simply part of what you would virtually call the power of ritual and raising food. We talked about vegetarianism, raising food to a level of connection with the divine, and this is part of the rituals of Judaism. Let's turn next. So let's flip this page, because the next little section I want to do here and try and move right along is this issue of life cycle events. We can consider this a continuation of this issue of ritual. The life cycle events in a Jewish life, in Judaism. And it begins with birth. And part of this, the rituals associated with birth, you actually already know, and that's that word Brit or bris. The Brit. This is, you should know this. I would ask you if you were here. This is the circumcision. circumcision that takes place on the 8th day of a Jewish boy's birth. It's a celebration. We talked about it. The family gets together. A grandfather holds the baby. A ritual circumciser says the prayers, and baby's given a little wine, and the circumcision takes place, and everyone celebrates, and that is a big ritual. In tradition, there was no major ritual for girls. Now, what has basically come up is, in the last couple hundred years, is this issue of baby blessing. A baby girl will be brought to the temple, perhaps on a Sabbath, and her name read out loud, and a blessing called down on her. So there are a couple of clearly there's no bris associated with a baby girl, not in Judaism. The rituals around birth. You're expected to be educated. We'll talk about that as a parent. The next big life cycle event, it takes place at the age of 13, sometimes 12 for girls, is what is called the bar mitzvah. The bar mitzvah. Or for girls, the bat mitzvah. This is a ceremony in which a 13-year-old, 12-year-old girl is brought before the congregation. They lead some prayers. Depending on the denomination, in Orthodoxy, the girls are not called to the Torah. A boy would be called to read the Torah, and this becomes a coming-of-age ritual. This is basically what marks them becoming a man or a woman. That they become morally responsible for their actions. That their parents are no longer responsible. So the joke is today, I became a man. You become a practicing member of the congregation. You can be called to the Torah. You can handle ritual duties. This is what is meant by this the bar mitzvah, and it's a rite of passage. If you're ever looking for something to do, you could Google funny bar mitzvah speeches. These 13-year-old kids giving a speech to the congregation about something trying to give a teaching associated with Judaism, and sometimes some of them are awry. They're really, really cute. It's a great ritual. Kids blossom and they gain confidence from it. It's that whole fear of speaking before a crowd in Judaism. That fear is, I won't say conquered, but certainly that challenge is taken on at the age of 13, and it gives you a real sense of accomplishment. One of my jokes about a bar mitzvah is that our son was bar mitzvahed, and my joke was that when he was bar mitzvahed, I became a man. The wedding was thrown by parents. This is the first celebration that as an adult you're responsible for putting on for the whole family. The whole family is invited. There's often a luncheon afterwards. There's a party for the bar mitzvah child, and they get lots of presents, and you have to pay the bill. So as an adult, when you have a 13-year-old, that's when you really realize that you've grown up. So the bar mitzvah, weddings, the rituals associated with weddings. Weddings have a script to them to some extent. One of the things that happens at a wedding, didn't mention this completely yet, touch base at the bris because of the wine. One of the things in Judaism that is powerful is that there is a word, the word is called kiddush. The kiddush is the drinking of wine. Kiddush means to make holy. And so, what happens is that at many celebrations, and every Sabbath, you say the Kiddush, the blessings over the wine and the drinking of wine. And that invokes the holy. Wine symbolizes life and spirit. It ultimately symbolizes the divine. You will see that this will get carried forward into Christianity as the Spirit of Christ and the blood of Christ. In Judaism, wine makes a celebration holy. And that's why the joke is that the drinking age in Judaism is 8 days. At a bar mitzvah, the bar mitzvah child will lead the kiddush and the drinking of the wine. At weddings, the kiddush is such that the two share the wine, the sharing of wine. And it is part of the wedding ceremony in which that symbolizes the sharing of their life from this day forward, the sharing of joy, the sharing of spirit, the sharing of their relationship with the divine, the sharing of the wine. There are a couple of other rituals in a Jewish wedding ceremony. There's the exchange of rings. There's a series of blessings. In fact, there's something called the 7 blessings. Not all Jews, especially if you Reform, work with this, but the 7 blessings of the wedding couple, and there is an Orthodox symbolism, and the girls in the class are going to cringe a little, I understand. And that's the ritual where the bride circles the groom 7 times. I hate to tell you this, but it symbolizes, talk about ritual, raising an abstract concept to the level of sensation. The circling of the groom 7 times symbolizes her obedience to her husband 7 days of the week. I apologize for that one. In Reform and in many conservative, we'll talk about that, it has been more equalized in some, if they even want to honor the 7 blessings and the circling, they will, the bride will circle the groom 3 times, the groom will circle the bride 3 times, and the two will circle together once, symbolizing the Sabbath. So that is one way in which in modern times that ritual has been updated. It's an interesting one, and every once in a while, I'm requested to include it in a Jewish wedding. If you have a child after your wedding, you are expected to educate them. Education is a big part. This is where that emphasis in Judaism, the emphasis on education. I would tell you this: in most Jewish families, and I certainly don't want to universalize it. Most Jewish families consider it their obligation to pay for their child's college, at least their undergraduate college. Parents save up for that. Parents in Judea, this is Jewish children are amongst the most educated. We talked about that in terms of the religious groups. Hinduism and Judaism have the highest per capita education, higher education experience of all the religious groups. It is an emphasis in Judaism to educate your children. And then oftentimes the graduate schools will be the responsibility of the child because their income will be boosted by having gone. So kind of a bit of a Jewish custom. That brings us to the issue of death. There is a death ritual, a mourning ritual. First of all, what happens at death is that immediate. The idea is the funeral is as quickly as possible. It is not the wakes and it's not drawn out. The idea in Judaism is to get the body into the ground. The funeral takes place within 1 or 2 days. Always. This is part of the mourning ritual, and then the mourning begins. So the funeral is right away. In particular Orthodoxy, there is no cremation. The body is buried. The funeral takes place. And then they come back to the house and the mourning ritual begins. The mourning ritual is called Shiva. Shiva. Sitting Shiva. Shiva simply means the number 7. 7. The ritual is that you sit for 7 days. 7 days of mourning. The family, the immediate family, doesn't have to do anything. They cover the mirrors in the house so that they don't have to see themselves looking forlorn. There's a ritual of tearing a piece of the garment, the wrenching of your clothes. That's a ritual because someone has been torn away from you. People come over, they bring you food, you do not have to cook. Your goal is to sit for 7 days and remember and appreciate, and in the evening a minyan will get together of 10 people in their home so that they can say the ritual morning prayers, and they will be amplified by the fact that there are 10 people there. So to go to a mourner's house and make sure they have 10 people is a blessing for you to be able to do that. This is part of the mourning ritual. Part of the theory is that the soul sticks around. The soul is mourning as well. The soul isn't quite ready to leave. The soul is almost there, participating. And then at the end of the 7 days, the 7 days ends, very practical. The 7 days ends and you're expected to begin getting back to your life. If you are closely related, there is another formula for 30 days. For 30 days, you do not go to parties and you go to temple every Friday night or Saturday at least, to say the mourner's prayers, which are at every service, for 30 days. And then if it is someone very close, then it's a year. If it's your parent or a child or a spouse, with some differences between men and women, that for the girls, and the women are supposed to mourn their husbands for a year. Men are supposed to mourn their wives for 30 days. That is a rule in Judaism. It goes back to the fact that men had to, if they were left with children, men were actually encouraged to remarry, to perhaps even marry the sister of his wife, so someone that would help raise the kids so that he could get back to work. Some of these were very practical rules. So just so you know, one of the things I like to say about a year, and for any of you that have lost anyone or when that will happen in your life, know something about that year. When I talk to people, it does take a year if they're close to you, because that year is a year of firsts. That's the first birthday that they haven't attended, the first Thanksgiving that they're not there, the first Christmas, the first... You literally have to get through a year before you're basically starting to get used to the fact that they're no longer here. It's a challenge, and it takes a year. So these are some of the the mourning rituals associated with Judaism. These are basically the life cycle events. Follows with you all your life. Elements of a Jewish life. Some of these play out as I turn to this issue of the denominations. Now, we're basically going to focus on 3 denominations. There are a few others. The 3 major denominations are Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. I've lost my balance and one of the legs is off a little bit. The 3 main branches, there's now a Reconstructionist and there are a few others. But these are the 3 main ones. For the longest time, it was Orthodoxy, just like it was Catholicism and Christianity. Took till the 1500s to have that Protestant Revolution. In Judaism, it really takes place in about the 1800s, begins in Germany, a conservative movement, and ultimately a reform movement. And what you've got is the relaxing in certain areas. So I'm going to make this a chart, and we're going to talk about things like, I'm going to put some issues down here that you hopefully have learned about now in Judaism, and see how it plays out between the 3 different denominations. So, for example, we had that issue of identity. Identity. What makes you a Jew? In Orthodoxy, it is the mother. In Conservative, it is the mother. Your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. In Reform, it is either. Either the mother or the father. And you will be considered Jewish. When we look at things like the Sabbath, that word for rest. In Orthodoxy, boy, they take it literally. There is no work. It is a strict issue. And you don't drive on the Sabbath. You don't even turn on a light switch on this. You set up your lights. You cook your meal and leave it on a hot plate all for 24 hours so that you can just graze instead of no one has to cook a meal. Very strict, this issue of no work on the Sabbath. In Conservative, it is usually conservatives, I call this the mid, they have a middle way of honoring it. They'll drive to temple. They will make food, but they ideally won't go to work if they can help it. So Conservative and Reform is lax. So Reform will honor it in a different way. Perhaps they won't look at their email. That's one of the ways my wife honors the Sabbath. They'll turn off their phone, or perhaps they don't work, but they're not worried about turning on light switches or anything like that. This issue of the Sabbath, this is an issue in Israel where the Orthodox community will stone cars driving on the Sabbath because they think they're violating the law. This issue of kosher, remember, just meaning okay. In Orthodoxy, it's strict. It's they even have what are called milk and meat dishes, so that the meat doesn't touch a dish that milk ultimately touches, or cheese or something like that. Very strict. I joke when I became vegetarian. I was raised in a Jewish household, and My mother thought I was going to die, and one of the things I said to her is, "Mom, look at it this way. I keep kosher now. I even have milk and meat dishes. The dog gets the meat dish, and I'm not eating out of it. I can't imagine touching that dish." This is part of the idea behind some of those kosher laws. So strict, conservative will be mid to lax, and most reform do not keep kosher. They are lax. Another way in which it plays out. In temple, there's an issue in temple on the Sabbath in particular about men and women worshiping together. In men and women, and if you watch Fiddler on the Roof, and now if you watch Fiddler on the Roof, especially after what you've learned about Judaism, that you'll have a little more appreciation for what's going on in that movie. In Orthodoxy, they don't dance together. And there's a scene where they put a handkerchief between them and they actually break that law. So in Orthodoxy, men and women are separate. Separate, there's an A in there. In conservative and reform, they worship together. Although I will tell you that last semester I was in Brazil. I went to a temple there, and it was a conservative temple, and the men and women were separate. Now, they weren't separate like behind a veil or off by the side. One half the temple, the women sat on one half and the men sat on the other half, all the way down to the front, but they were separate. It was, and that surprised me. I didn't realize any conservative temples were still separating men from women. I want to, this issue of Shiva, which we just discussed. Shiva, for Orthodoxy, it is a full 7 days. In conservative, you will really find that it's probably 3 to 7 days that they actually sit. And in reform, it's more like 1 to 4 days. So this literal interpretation of the word Shiva into 7 has been watered down in conservative and reform. What else do I have on here? Interesting issue, that issue of a minyan. What it takes to multiply Jewish prayer. How many? In Orthodoxy, it is 10 Jewish men. 10 Jewish men. Period. And that's what it takes to what is called make a minyan. In conservative, where we now have female rabbis, it is 10 Jews. They do need to be Jewish in conservative. And in reform, it is basically 10 breathing people. Reform is there's acute falling off in the this issue of what it takes to make a minyan. We didn't get to it. We will be getting to it. I touched base a little bit, this issue of the Messiah. We'll talk more about the issue of a Messiah and when we get to Jesus, but Orthodoxy is waiting. They think the Messiah is still coming. I mentioned it in the 13 Principles of Maimonides. They're still waiting. The Messiah is coming. In conservative, most conservative, they don't know. It's they're pretty wishy-washy about it. And reform, I like to joke, has given up. There's no Messiah coming. So this becomes an issue of faith that again, gets watered down between 3 different denominations. This issue of a yarmulke, whether you have to wear it. In Orthodoxy, yarmulkes are there. You are expected to. You are expected to cover your head. Even women. Women will either put a shawl on, a scarf, or one of the single biggest markets for wigs is Jewish women. Orthodox Jewish women wear a lot of wigs. That fulfills both the beauty side and the literal side of covering their head. Big market for female wigs is the Orthodox Jewish community. So they will wear the yarmulke. Conservative, for the most part, carries this through. There will be a stack of yarmulkes. If you're visiting a conservative temple and you're male, you would be expected to put it on. In Reform, it's some do and some don't. You'll find it there, but many people not wearing it. Many people not wearing it. Some of the issues. Daily prayer. Last one I want to talk about. Daily prayer. In Orthodoxy, it is 3 times a day. 3 per day. There is a morning, an afternoon, and an evening prayer. I talked about getting caught in that store. 3 times a day in which you say the Shema, say there's something called the 18 blessings, the Shemona Esrei, the standing prayer. That's when you see them standing. 3 times a day in Orthodoxy. In Conservative, there will be a prayer probably every morning in a Conservative temple. It is 1 per day, but 3 on the Sabbath. And by the way, there's an additional prayer on Yom Kippur, a couple of exceptions to this rule, and basically in Reform, it's once a week. Once a week. That's the way it works out. And this gives you a real feel for what it means how strictly you follow the laws of Judaism. All 3 will define themselves as Jewish. There is a wide range. The temple here in Hudson is Reform, and that's the one that I would have had you come to. They're not even holding services, or I don't know when they'll hold them again, but if you're ever interested, feel free to contact me. I'd be glad to share the experience with you. The denominations of Judaism. So I want to turn now, as we begin to wind down, I want to turn to the issue of Israel. You already know that Israel means to wrestle with God. Controversial word. Little history. The word is Zionism. Zionism. Perhaps you've heard this word. Perhaps you've heard it. Usually, if you've heard it, you have not heard it in a real positive way. It's often an accusation that Zionists are trying to take over the world. Zionism, so you understand, simply means the word Zion. Zion comes from the word Sion, which is a mountain Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Zionism, a term for the return to Jerusalem. The goal to return to Jerusalem. Zionism begins in the late 1800s. This is when the word is coined, and we need to understand the context here. In the late 1800s, Jews are being persecuted. Persecuted throughout Eastern Europe, persecuted throughout Russia, pogroms, persecutions have begun. And so Jews begin yearning for their own land, yearning to, in effect, return to Jerusalem. And so what happens in the late 1800s is there were some well-to-do Jews in Europe, in particular a family called the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds agree to finance. There's a leader by the name of Theodor Herzl. This is the man that basically comes up with this Zionist plan to have the Jews return to the Promised Land. The land promised to Abraham by God. Now, there have been Jews living in what will become Palestine and ultimately Israel all the time we've been talking about. Not a lot. I mean, that population ebbed and flowed. It was reduced when Rome took over. It had a few minor comebacks. In general, in the late 1800s, there are probably 50,000 Jews in this area called Palestine. Not even called Palestine yet. In that area. And so Theodor Herzl decides that we should go back there. Baron Rothschild puts up some money, and what do? They buy land. This becomes an interesting issue in some of the disputes between the Arabs and the Jews, but it starts out that they buy land. This area, Palestine, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, was basically a feudalistic place. It was the Middle Age. It was Arab sheiks owning vast land areas, and peasants, Arab peasants, worked the land. Paid tribute to the sheiks. The sheiks may not have even lived there. The sheiks lived in Damascus, or the sheiks lived in Beirut, and they owned these vast land farms, so to speak, and the peasants worked them. And what happened was that the Jews, the European Jews of the late 1800s, purchase some of these big farms. They're not doing well. They're eking out a living, but they buy these vast land parcels owned by the sheiks, and European Jews go down to work the land. Now, there's a joke here in the late 1800s. The first wave of Zionism was a mess. The Jews from Europe went down. They were, in many cases, merchants. They had no idea how to farm. They thought it was going to be a land of milk and honey, like the Bible promises, and it's arid desert, and it is God-forsaken. Jerusalem is God. Jerusalem is this wayward old trading city that isn't even on the trading route anymore. Everything is it's pretty poor. we would call it third world. This is where they come and they fail miserably. The first wave of Zionism in the late 1800s, they landed there, they couldn't make a go of it, and they moved back, or they moved into a city, or they just left. And basically the sheiks got back the land. Now, the sheiks kind of thought this was a great deal. They sold it and then they got it back. And then they learned from their mistakes of the late 1800s. In the early 1900s, now we're talking about after World War I, 1914 to 17, the British have now taken over. This is where the British calls it Palestine. It becomes more understood as Palestine. Another wave of Zionism, another wave of escaping the persecution of Europe, and only this time, before they go, the money to buy the land is used also to educate them in how to farm in an arid landscape, how to irrigate, how to the proper crops to grow. A vast education program precedes the second wave of Zionism. They do it exactly the same way, using Jewish European money. They buy the land from the sheiks, and now understand the beginning of this conflict. When the Jews come down to live and work the land they have purchased, there are Arab peasants on that land. And those peasants have to leave. And so, from the get-go, there's this conflict between the Arabs that were inhabiting the land at the time. Always this question of whose land is it, and where do you go back to, and the land was purchased. But that doesn't help the Arabs that were living on it. They were displaced. The tension between the Jewish settlers and the Arab peasants, we have yet to resolve that today. This is the seeds of the conflict that we are literally still playing out today. The Jews come down, and in the second wave, they make the desert bloom. They work through things called kibbutz. The kibbutz system. The kibbutz was a communal farm. It is through the communal farms that they transform the desert into the Garden of Eden. Israel becomes a major exporter of oranges, the orange groves, and they make the desert bloom. And then, I don't have to tell you about the Holocaust. The Holocaust from 1939 to 1945. The loss of 3/4 of the European Jews. Palestine becomes the haven, becomes the place, the only safe place. The United States wouldn't take them either. You cannot understand the state of Israel without understanding the Holocaust. The conflicts between people that were there and the Jews coming. Look, the original Israeli vision was Arabs and Jews sharing the place, working side by side, the Semitic people related back to Abraham, sharing the same land. This is what has happened to a better and worse degree depending on the area, between 1917 and 1945. There is cooperation. There is the Jewish settlers conquer malaria. There was malaria, was rampant, mosquitoes. By draining the swamps, by cultivating the irrigation systems, Arabs and Jews side by side benefited collectively. We talked about the jealousy of anti-Semitism. I don't want to read into this. This is not an easily resolved conflict. Both sides have major claims. We can't get into that. In 1948, the State of Israel is formed. It is named Israel. You know that story, the changing of Jacob's name to Israel, and all the descendants becoming the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob who wrestled with God. The State of Israel is formed. Immediately, they were surrounded by, at the time there were about 600,000 Jews in Palestine, Israel. They were surrounded by Jordan, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. Countries that totaled over 60 million Arabs. And the day the State of Israel was formed, all of those countries declared war. The original partition of the State of Israel was to be two states, an Arab state of Palestine, assuming, and a Jewish state of Israel. Actually, Israelis, the Jews, were not happy with that to begin with. Their vision was much more idealistic. Their vision was of one nation, with the two working together. The Arab states never agreed. The day that Israel was partitioned by the United Nations, they all attacked at once. One of the most amazing stories is how 600,000 Jews were able to fight off, in effect, 60 million Arabs and hold on to the strip of land that became known as Israel. They only fought to a standstill. There has never been a peace treaty. They fought to a ceasefire. Those were the lines drawn. After the War of Independence, they called it the War of Independence in Israel in 1948. There were a number of problems since. Arabs, there was an Arab-Egyptian war in the 1950s. There was 1967. 1967 was the Six-Day War. It was in the Six-Day War. The Arab forces mounted on all fronts. They attacked, and Israel fought it back on all fronts. They fought it. That's when they took back Jerusalem. They took back the Golan Heights from Syria. They took Gaza and the whole peninsula down there. This was the Six-Day War in 1967. Since then, they gave back Gaza. They gave back the Negev to Egypt. They did not give back the Golan Heights, and they did not give back Jerusalem. They've been occupying the West Bank. It's been an even bigger mess. The occupation has not gone well. The issues within Israel, I can't defend it. I'm not going to try and defend it. Both sides have major claims. One of the problems that stands in the way, though, I would read for you, which is part of what they are up against and part of what the United States is up against in trying to reach a compromise and find a solution. Hamas is the ruling party of Gaza in particular. From the covenant of Hamas, from the preamble of Hamas, Israel will exist and will continue to exist until Islam will obliterate it, just as it has obliterated others before it. In Article 7, the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims fight Jews and kill them. Then the Jews will hide behind rocks and trees, and the rocks and trees will cry out, "O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him." And part of what the United States is up against, along with Israel. Article 13. Peace initiatives and so-called peaceful solutions and international conferences are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement. Those conferences are no more than a means to appoint the infidels as arbitrators in the lands of Islam. There is no solution for the Palestinian problem except by jihad, by war. Initiatives, proposals, and international conferences are but a waste of time, an exercise in futility. The Middle East is at a stalemate. Israel today. I want you to at least understand this. Today. Today in Israel. Israel, because this is going to come as a surprise to many of you, Israel has roughly 8 million people. That's it, by the way, 8 million. Of the 8 million, 75%, approximately 6 million, are Jews. 1.8 million, 21%, 2.1 million are Arabs. Understand something. All the Arabs did not leave. That vision of Arabs and Jews working together, many stayed. They stayed on their land. They did not flee to the refugee camps. These are Israeli citizens. They have their own political party. It is the second biggest political party in Israel. An Arab sits on the Israeli Supreme Court. There is a model of them working together. It's not perfect. This is a democratic country. It flourishes. It works. It's incredibly successful. The United States turns to them for military technology. The state of Israel, 8 million people, have the largest concentration of worldwide patents on technology in the world. When we talk about the accomplishments of Jews, Israel is a model. There are about, I'm sorry, this is 2.1. This is actually 1.8, and there's about 200,000 others. Christians, Christians running the holy sites of Christianity there. These are others. Just so you know, to put in some perspective, in Gaza, there are 1.7 million Arabs. In the West Bank, there are roughly 2.75 million Arabs. 4.5 million, almost 2 million, pretty close. It's how it breaks down, and we still don't have a solution, and I don't have one either. But know this, there isn't a family in Israel. There isn't a Jewish family in Israel. I almost want to say there isn't a Jewish family in the world. Clearly, the farther we get away from the Holocaust, the more this changes. But there is not an Israeli family, Jewish family, that was not deeply hurt by the Holocaust. The Jews living in Israel do not feel they have any place else to go. This is the Jewish homeland today. Israel. Zionism does not mean taking over the world. They would like to live in peace in the Middle East. Last thing, still not an hour and 15 minutes yet. This is one of my longest lecture, but let's turn to that little chart as we summarize Judaism. If you were there, I would ask you to pull it out. Knowledge, the knowledge basis in Judaism. We've got, obviously, the Torah, the first 5 books. We have the rest of the Jewish Bible. The correct way to say it without saying the Old Testament. The rest of the Jewish Bible, which fills in with prophets and kings and Psalms and all the various books that we know of as the Jewish Bible. And as we know, we have that Talmud, which consists of the Mishnah and the Gemara, plus knowledge equals teaching plus learning. The oral teachings, the oral law, oral teachings plus the commentary. The Talmud, the basis of rabbinic Judaism. There are other books. There's a mystical side branch of Judaism. There are other books, but these are the big ones. We come down here to devotion. The dues. In Judaism, there are a bunch of them. We have prayer, the Shema, and prayer, and other prayers. We have the issue of a minyan, that quorum that multiplies prayer. We've got the Sabbath, honor the Sabbath and all the holidays. Those high holy days that we talked about. Issue of kosher. Some of these dues, obviously, depending on the denomination, stronger or weaker. Issues like circumcision. A due, sitting Shiva. In the morning ritual is a due. We've got the 613 commandments to follow. Goes on and on. There is a call to charity, to give to charity. We didn't go into that, but there are laws of, in effect, tithing. Tithing comes from the Old Testament. 10% of your farm should be left unharvested, so that the poor can come and glean food. Some of these are some of the charity laws and dues within Judaism. Let's see if I have anything else. Let's leave those as the main ones. Plus this issue of devotion and the Tetragrammaton, the Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. The sacredness of the Lord's name. We had over here, we get the beliefs. The beliefs in one God, monotheism, one of the big ones, if not the biggest, monotheism. We've got this issue of the Messiah to come and bring peace and prosperity and resurrect the dead. We have the belief in the Torah. I realize the Torah is up here, but this issue of it being a gift from God, a gift to Moses on Mount Sinai, the origin of the Torah becomes an issue of belief to some extent. The belief in Zionism, the land promised to Abraham. It's not the world, it's just the land in the Middle East that was promised to Abraham. There is something called, we didn't get into it, Olam Haba, is the world to come. The world to come isn't a lot in Judaism about heaven and hell at all. The Torah does not talk about it at all. But there is this concept of a world to come, and the resurrection of the dead, and so it's not well formulated. It's not universal within Judaism, but there is the feeling that through good deeds and charity, you earn a place in the world to come. Repair the world. This is one of the dues, in effect. In fact, the word would be tikkun olam, if I want to put it down here. Tikkun olam means, so olam means world. Tikkun means to repair the world. You are called to an object, an element of devotion, a path, just like we had karma yoga in Hinduism. Repair the world. And then we have the institutional. In particular, this issue of the rabbis. Rabbi meaning teacher. Rabbis. Now the ordained ministers of Judaism. You had the branches of Judaism, those denominations that I talked about today, and more. But clearly we have the temples, temples associated with each branch, and that's where there's some centralization, but in general the rabbis in the temples carry out the day-to-day elements of Judaism, and then you've got basically the relationship with Israel, the big institution, the homeland for all Jews. Got through it, a little more than an hour and 15 minutes, but then again, where did you have to go? So covered a lot of ground today. And this finishes Judaism. I'm going to see about putting together a test on Judaism. Watch your emails, and we'll see how that's going to get carried out. I sent an email yesterday and said that I would get back to you on the new grading format. I'm still working through that with the dean. So stay tuned. Next video will begin the first of a series of 4 on Christianity. We will pick up where we left off that week at the end of the, in effect, the Old Testament. We will pick up at the beginning of that millennia with the birth of Jesus. So next lecture will be the life of Jesus. Stay safe. Keep your family safe. Blessings to all.